Hello and good day, everyone, and hope you're doing great. I'm super excited to invite you to today's webinar on it being a turbulent first half for procurement and what's the impact on strategic priorities. The focus of today's webinar will stay on procurement's key issues in 2025. Think of this as a pulse check or a quick poll reveal on evolving procurement priorities. Before I power ahead, general housekeeping rules. All attendees will be on mute throughout the duration of the webinar, please. Kindly do key in any questions in the question box on the right-hand side top at any point of time during the webinar. We will either address them on the trot or during the Q&A block during the final 10 minutes of this hour-long webinar. If you have any troubleshooting questions around audio or video feeds at any point of time, do drop a note on the same question box too, please. We actually might run a couple of quick polls during the course of the webinar just to keep things interactive and personalized. Kindly do participate if you're comfortable, please. It's completely anonymized. Julying ahead, just a little bit of background and context to the Barrow-Hackett partnership. So the Barrow-Hackett partnership is a strategic one aimed at enhancing procurement insights for global organizations. So the partnership actually includes integrating Barrow's AI-powered procurement intelligence with the Hackett Group's world-class research and benchmarking data. So the relationship enables procurement professionals to make faster, more informed decisions with deeper real-time visibility. Also, the Barrow-Hackett relationship aims to bridge the gap between exec-level decision-making and ground-level tribal knowledge, category-level strategy execution. So this one is a first in a series of initiatives between Barrow and the Hackett Group, with more joint offerings to be announced in the coming months. So zeroing in to the topic of the webinar, it's going to be on how turbulent H1 has been for procurement and what's the impact on strategic priorities for each of you who are attending this webinar. In Q4 2024, the Hackett Group collected feedback from senior procurement leaders for the 2025 procurement agenda and key issues study, which is something which they regularly do, to understand agendas, goals, initiatives, strategies for success in 2025 for procurement organizations. But point to note is that since then, business environments have been super unpredictable, ever changing due to tariffs, economic volatility, concerns over slowing global economic growth, and potential inflation increases and continued geopolitical disruptions. So that's the background, that's the context, that's the intent. Quick introduction to Chris Sachak, who's there on this webinar, who you can see on your video feeds. Chris has about 20 years of experience in supply management, works directly with Global 2000 and mid-sized companies across the globe, variety of industries, understands every part of supply management, specializes in process redesign, technology enablement, ops strategy, org change, strategic sourcing. Chris is also a regular contributor in business publications and industry events, written research papers, authored books, so on and so forth. Chris has also served in ops, sales, and engineering roles. The focus, however, is procurement right now. And from what I know of Chris is that his insights are the ladder procurement brings into negotiations if you want savings through the roof. That's the way I would look at Chris. And my name's Vel Kumar Krishnan, or just Vel. And Chris, I promise that's me in the photograph. Other than you, my phone's facial recognition software and TSA feel the same way that it's not me. And over to you, Chris. The flow is all yours.
All righty. Well, thank you, Val, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to share some insights with you. As Val mentioned, one of the things that we do on an annual basis, many of you may be familiar, is we do a study where we go out to the market on a global basis. And it's a study where we want to glean insights in terms of the priorities that leaders of supply management and procurement have as they're looking into the next year. We also want to understand the investments that they're making in capabilities. And those capabilities could be technology capabilities, process capabilities, organizational capabilities, talent. So it's this broad understanding of what we want to understand. Now, one of the things that we get asked a lot is, well, why are you doing this? This is a study that we've been doing for nearly 20 years on an annual basis. It's a study that we do coming into every year. So we're actually conducting the study in the fall of every year. as we're trying to glean insights in terms of those priorities, those investments, those improvement opportunities, even where organizations are making investments in technology as we look into the next year. The question today is, and Vel gave you some, insights in terms of why now and why did we do a pulse update? I call it a quick pulse update. It's something that we haven't done in the nearly 20 years we've been conducting the study. The reason is what he highlighted is the environment that's around us. Things have been very volatile. A lot of people are characterizing the environment with a term called VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. This has been a lot of the characteristics that we've all been experiencing. And one of the things that we felt is that the environment has fundamentally changed. We also felt that priorities may be shifting. Even the investments that we have as organizations into supply management may be changing as well. So it was an opportunity for us to go out. We actually conducted the study in May. So throughout throughout the month of May, we went out to ask three fundamental questions. One is, when we saw coming into the year, we asked organizations when they think about the savings that they were expecting to deliver to the organizations, coming into 2025, has that fundamentally changed as a result of many of the, I'll say, environmental volatility, uncertainty that we've been experiencing, namely the tariffs? Has that fundamentally changed? Has the expectations in terms of that delivery of those results changed now that we're halfway through the year versus where we were coming into 2025? The second thing that we wanted to explore were the priorities. The priorities that supply management leaders have. What are the things that they're focused on most urgently within their organizations as they look at architecting, shaping, and focusing their organizations on the success and enabling the success of their enterprises? And lastly, to meet those priorities, where are they making investments? Where are they making investments across a number of different areas when it comes to capabilities within their organization? Those are the three things that we wanted to explore. Now, the study that we did and conducted coming into 2025 was much more broad than that. We looked at a number of things beyond those, but those are the fundamental three areas that we wanted to explore and understand. Has the current environment, the one that I've described in this climate of VUCA, has that fundamentally changed as a result of that? So that's what we want to share with you today. Now, to give you a little bit of insights in terms of the profile of the organizations that participated, it's similar to what we had coming into this year, but it's a little bit different. One of the things that we see is that, nearly 2/3 of the organizations are in North America and the rest are in the rest of the world. So as we move forward, what I want to start to share is insights into those cost savings. The first thing that we wanted to explore, the projection in cost savings of organizations. So what I'm highlighting on here are two perspectives. One, on the top, is you look at the left and you look at the right. What we're looking at here are purchase cost reductions on the left and cost avoidances on the right. If you go back to the beginning of this year, what we saw was some significant optimism across the population of organizations that primarily comprised North America, Europe, as well as Asia Pacific. Across that population, what we saw was a increased level of optimism in 2025, in some ways to claw back some of the increases many of us had taken on during the years of 21, 22, 23, when we saw significant inflation within our environments. What we saw was a more significant focus on reducing cost as we came into 2024. It elevated to the number one priority for procurement organizations, and it remained there in 2025. So the thing that we wanted to really understand is how much and what is the expectation that you have for that. So as we came into this year, there was a lot of optimism, much more significant than what we saw coming into 2024, and the ability to drive more savings, both from a purchase cost reduction and an avoidance standpoint to the enterprises. But what has happened as we further go through the school and through this year, and we see some of the volatility that we have experienced during this period of time, there's less optimism today. You can see that on the left in terms of the reduction, in terms of the smaller percentage of organizations that are forecasting increasing savings versus what they were able to deliver in 2024. And maybe that's something I just want to explain very simply here. The question that we're asking here is fundamentally an example would be is if you saved $50 million in 2024 and you deliver that to the organization, is your expectation in 2025 to deliver more than 50 million, to deliver roughly the same amount, 50 million, or less than 50 million? So we're comparing it against the baseline that we established in 2024. What were we able to deliver? And so again, when we came into this year, nearly 50% of the organizations highlighted that they would be able to deliver significantly more than what they were able to deliver in 24 in 2025. Where we are now, halfway through the year, that percentage of organizations has shrunk. It shrunk from 48% down to 37%. And we're seeing the same thing in terms of cost avoidance as well. So what we're seeing in an environment today is an environment that is less optimistic in terms of our ability to deliver this form of value to our organizations, to our enterprises, than where we were coming into the year in January. So if we move forward, what we now want to do, and I want to explore with you, is to share some insights into the priorities that procurement organizations had coming into this year. And to do that, we're going to start off with a poll. And so, Mishnan, I'm going to ask you to bring up that poll, and what you see here are some priorities. Now, this is not going to replicate what we were able to do in the study, but I would ask all of you to just select, what is your top priority for your organization? Now that we're halfway through 2025 and we're looking at the back half of this year, what is the top priority that your organization has for 2025? So we're looking at a number of different things here. I'll let this keep going for a bit of time. And certainly what we're seeing, cost is certainly elevated. Vel, this is not surprising. That was very elevated coming into the year. Not surprising that cost is elevated. Managing the impact of tariffs, that certainly is a common, consideration across many, many different organizations, especially those with physical goods supply chains. But also, which is interesting, is the strategic value creation by procurement. Um, in many ways, you see this sort of balance between the two, which is encouraging. We're not just focusing on costs, we're also looking at, yes, we have to do that, but at the same time, we have to find ways to create strategic value to enable the success of our enterprises, not just through cost, but other ways as well. AI, not sure if that's surprising to you, Vel, but I look at that AI adoption, digital transformation, 10%. So a lower percentage there. it'll be interesting, when we look at what we saw in our study, going out to a number of different organizations. But that, the one area that's always interesting is supply resilience and risk mitigation. This is an area that, when I look back, back prior to 2020, this is something that we did not see as a significant priority for procurement organizations. It really was the pandemic, the COVID, and just the way that the world reacted to it, and the shutdown of all the the borders around the world, and the impact on free flowing trade during that period of time, that impacted and really elevated the importance of resilience and risk mitigation within our supply chains, mainly to protect the revenue of our organization. So that really got elevated during that period of time. And what we see is it's continuing to be an elevated priority within organizations. So why don't we take a look at what we saw coming into 2025? So if we head to the next slide, when we came into this year, one of the things that we saw was that cost reduction remained the number one priority. I mentioned it just a minute ago, actually, when I was talking about some of the cost reductions, some of the optimism that has degraded a bit as we're now halfway through 2025 across this larger population of organizations globally. But coming into this year, we did see a focus on improving that spend cost reduction, within our organizations. Again, that was 2024 top priority, but before 2024, 23 and 22, this was not our top priority. Our top priority was number two. That was ensuring the continuity within our organizations. It was about protecting the revenue generation, our ability to deliver the services and products to our customers. That was number one. It was the one area that elevated us to the boardroom in many of our enterprises. What were we going to be able to do to protect that and protect that risk and mitigate that risk within our organizations? So you still see it's very elevated as we came into 2025. There are still sticky areas out there. We see that. But if you look at it more broadly, many of the areas that we had concerns around in terms of supply continuity have been mitigated. But, with the elevation of the concern around tariffs, that started elevating some of the concerns around continuity as we, came into this year. And that really started to percolate in the November timeframe of last year. One of the things that's very interesting on this study as we were coming into 2025 was number three, transforming the operating model of procurement. This is something that we've never seen elevated this high in our study in all of the years, a couple of decades that we've been running it. In 2024, this was number five. And it was the first time that it was in the top five. And what we saw coming into this year, it got elevated even further. And I get asked the question quite often is, why is that? Why do you see that occurring? My perspective here and the conversations I've had with organizations, this is really being elevated and prioritized due to the fact that there's a lot of different disruptions that are occurring. And I would suggest primarily around AI. We know that AI, generative AI, agentic AI will be disruptive to not only our enterprises, but what we do and how we do it within supply management and procurement. And I think what organizations are highlighting here as they look at this as a key priority for them as they were coming into 2025 is that they had to sort of sit back and think to themselves, as I create an environment that's much more embedded now with more agentic and agents within that environment, it fundamentally impacts our operating model. And when I talk about the operating model, what I'm referring to is the broad context of all of the dimensions of how we do supply management and procurement. This includes your human capital, the processes that you execute as an organization. It includes the information and data that you consume and exhaust within the organization. It includes the technology decisions and the infrastructure that you utilize to enhance and automate all of those activities that you do and create the intelligence within the organization as well. It includes your organization structure, your policies, your decisions around where you actually execute work as a supply management organization. Are you going to do that in a more low cost area, offshore? Or are you going to bring that more near shore, especially with some of the tariff dynamics that have been occurring? These are all of the dimensions of that operating model. And there's many things that have been out there that are forcing us to rethink that operating model. And a lot of you are looking at it and saying, well, if I have an operating model, fundamentally, what are some of the core qualities and characteristics that I need out of that operating model? And one of those is having one that's much more agile in the environment that we're in, being able to react and respond and be more predictive in the VUCA environment that we're all experiencing today. If you go further through there, you see a number of other things. When you look at number 6, elevating, the strategic advisor as in procurement. This has been a mainstay in the top 5 since around 2016. It's one of the first years that it fell out of the top 5. But this is an important area that it's really looking at procurement, and even you as individuals within the supply management procurement organization. Are we strategic advisors, strategic partners, business partners, consultants, etc., to the businesses that we support, that we enable? Are we being sought out by them? This is what a strategic advisor is. And what we've seen is procurement organizations globally have elevated this as a significant priority for them. I don't always look at it as the output objective of the organization, but it's a critical enabler. Sustainability elevated from 24 a bit to number 7 from about 9. But the things that remain, improving and focusing on our analytical capabilities. The future of supply management isn't just about all of the things that we've been talking about, costs, etc. It is about creating a much more intelligent organization as we look forward. And to do that, we have to be much more proficient in engaging with the data that we have, and not just data within our organizations, but in the external supply markets, and be able to bring that together, develop the intelligence from that, and provide that to our organization. Not only provide unique intelligence about what may be happening in specific supply markets, but doing it in a timely way that gives us an edge over our peers and our competitors within the marketplace itself. So let's take a look at how things have changed now that we're halfway through the year. So if we go to the next slide, what I'm going to share with you is how some things have changed. I'm not going to go through all of this. I've shared a lot of my insights on the first slide, but I do want to highlight some of the changes that we see. One of those changes that I would highlight is the operating model. I spent some time talking, and some of you may be looking at this, and now that you're halfway through the year, is why did the operating model, for all the reasons, Chris, you highlighted why it was elevated, how did it drop from 3 to number 8? I think there's a couple of different reasons here. I would suggest that it's number 8. It's still a very high priority for organizations. And when you look at this, one of the things you have to look at all of these priorities is, yes, we do have a ranking here. When we rank, we ask organizations, is this a priority? Select from all of these 30 different priorities and which ones are priorities for your organizations. And number 2, we ask organizations, how important is it to you? It is a critical priority. Is it a high priority? Is it a medium priority? And we take all of that information and we rank. And what you'll find as you go through this, especially now, is you don't see significant differences, even though these are ranked, between all of these various priorities. One of the things that has fundamentally changed in procurement organizations over the last 10 years is that the number of priorities that we have on our plate has increased. I used to go out and I would ask organizations and leaders of procurement, I'd say, if you look at all of these, which are your priorities? Because this is coming from a broader population. Which of these are your priorities in your organizations? The responses I would get typically were a few of them. It could be number 2, it could be number 6, it could be number 9. If I asked a different organization, it might be number 1, it might be 4, and number 8. When I ask that question today, a more typical response I get is all of them. They're all priorities. And what we have seen is that the priorities that we've had in the past haven't gone away. What we have seen is that we have new priorities that are augmenting the priorities that we have in the past. And so our plate and the amount of activity that we have has increased. Sustainability augmented priorities of the past. It didn't replace them. And so you see this environment where it's much broader in terms of the number of priorities than what we had in the past. What we are seeing is this switching around of what's important. And so 2 things that I think are really insightful on this. One is number 6. I really want to spend some time on this. This is something that I've been highlighting for many, many years that I believe this is where we need to start thinking and focusing on as a supply management organization. It's ensuring that value and creating a competitive advantage or differentiation for the enterprise that we are part of. Many of us go out and we create value, and we do a phenomenal job of doing that. The question is that value that we're creating for our organization, whether it's number 1 in terms of cost savings, whether it is in terms of combating inflationary increases, maybe it's the way that we're ensuring continuity. The question is, and the risk that we're reducing, is it creating a differentiation? Is it creating an advantage for our organizations? And it's very difficult for us sometimes to be able to determine, is that occurring? I believe this is where we need to head as an organization. I also believe that the intelligence that we're gathering, that more of our value, the more of our ability to create this differentiation will be secured through our engagement with the insights that we're able to gain through the supply markets. And I'm not just saying your suppliers, I'm looking further upstream into supply markets more broadly, the entire network. Not easy to do. And that will get easier over time, or more palatable in terms of the effort that it takes to gain this information, to gain much more predictive and prescriptive insights from those markets, insights that we can take to organizations to act on. And so this is going to be something that organizations, not only have been focusing on, but are now on a global basis highlighting that this is a key priority for them looking forward. I believe that much of this is coming from the organizations themselves, the enterprise expecting this out of the supply management organization. I believe that AI, agentic AI, and the speed by which you're able to deploy it within your organization is going to gain and provide you the ability to gain an advantage. But advantages don't stay around for long. We know that in the way that we operate. And so, intelligence, information, things that we know about the supply markets that we need to act on, they get stale over time. And so it's the speed by which we're able to act on some of this information to do it. So it's not just the acquisition of the intelligence itself, it's also the speed by which we're able to act on it that provides us that advantage over other organizations. As you look at other things here, another one that is new, new compared to where we were in the beginning of the year, but not new to the top 10, and that's agility. Agility is critical. It's one of the things I mentioned before, is you create visions for your organizations. As you look out over the next 3 years, what's that vision that you have for your organizations? And many say they want them to be much more agile. And agile is not just about speed, it's not just about velocity, it's about being able to react quickly and be predictive. So that gives you a perspective of how things have changed. We have seen some, fundamental changes since the beginning of the year. There are some things that have remained the same, certainly in cost, even though there's less optimism in terms of our ability to deliver on that. But what we have seen is a resurgence or a surgence of this idea of creating an advantage for our enterprises. And I believe that some of that is being enabled by what we believe, and I believe that many of you believe, is the ability of what some of the technologies that are out there today can create for us. But I also is being driven by the desire of our companies to use supply management as a differentiator and something that they can create an advantage over their competitors. So why don't we go to the next area? And this is where we're going to talk about capabilities. As you think about the priorities that we have as organizations, you say, if these are all of the priorities that we have as supply management executives and professionals, the question is, where are we investing to enable these priorities? So if we go to the poll, and I want to go to the poll first and just get an insight in terms of what you are all thinking about. So can we bring up the poll on the capabilities, the improvement initiatives that all of, and let's see what you all are thinking about in your own environments. So what we have here are 5. And, again, just you can select one. I know that many of you probably look at this and say, I'd like to select more than one. And I'm sure that many of, but what is that top initiative that you have for your organization for 2025 as we look for the remainder of this year?
Hey, Chris, while those poll questions are getting responded to, just want to pick up a few questions which have already been coming in. And I think these are really, really interesting questions. I'll
Okay.
probably weigh in on them too, and then I'll probably read it out so that you actually know what the question is. I think there's an
Okay.
interesting question where one of the attendees wants to understand that all of these polls which have been running the Hackett responses, it clearly reflects procurement objectives, which is fantastic. But I think the question over here is that they would like to understand whether this actually aligns with business objectives and what ops or finance or end users or anybody within the organization outside of procurement would be aligned or misaligned to these. You know what I'm saying? So I think what they're trying to
Yeah.
see is there a delta between procurement objectives and org objectives? Please go ahead, and then I'll weigh in with a few points myself.
Yeah, yeah, great question. And again, we in supply management and procurement, we don't want to be operating on an island. We exist, and anybody in a corporation exists to enable the success of the enterprise. And, we have to ensure the alignment. One of the exercises, I did a presentation last year and actually did one, earlier this year as well, just looking at the alignment of financial, the finance organization's priorities with procurement. And basically what we did is, since we study other areas outside of procurement and supply management, supply chain, we look at finance and other parts of the business. And, when I looked at that and we looked at, we were able to align 8 of procurement's top priorities to something that is aligned, to a finance organizational priority as well. And so the conclusion was is we're very aligned as enterprises because these went out to do different populations, and we see that. The other thing is looking at it from an enterprise standpoint, and many of the years that we've done this study you know over a longer period of time, we ask, from an enterprise standpoint, we look at not just in procurement, but looking at all of these different organizations. What are those enterprise objectives? Your enterprise, what do they have? And so the question is, do we see alignment? Do we see that what procurement is focusing on is enabling those enterprise objectives as well? What I will tell you is that we're much more aligned today than, say 10 years ago. I remember a time where I was seeing that the enterprise objectives had shifted. This was actually in the early 2010, 2011, 12 kind of time frame. If you recall, we went through the financial collapse in 2008, and out of that, we went to a period where organizations were very much focused on cost. But as we got further away from that period of time, what we saw was the enterprise was much more focused on top line growth. And then when we looked at procurement's priorities, we saw cost still. It wasn't until a year later that we started seeing procurement align, to that, where we saw things that help to enable top line growth, things like new product development and supporting those types of activities within our company started to elevate as a priority for the supply management organizations. So there's delayed reaction. Today, we find that it's much more synchronized within organizations. So, Bill, I don't know if you want to comment on some of these initiatives, but category management, 37%. Number one, strategic supplier collaboration. Just engaging with suppliers, and I have to imagine this is not just with your tier one, but if you're going to engage with suppliers in a collaborative kind of way, can we do that? A little bit further upstream, with our tier two, tier three, et cetera, where it might make sense in those strategic supply markets that we're engaged in. TCO, spend, price data warehouses, a little bit lower, but certainly guided category management, number one. So, let's take a look at how that compares to, what we saw in our study when we asked organizations, what are they focusing on in 2025? So we can bring up the next slide. And what I'm going to share with you first is really just, as we look at, where we are today. Now, remember, we went out at the beginning of the year, we asked organizations, what are those initiatives that you're focusing on? And then we asked it again. And so what we saw here is what you're seeing in front of you. So this was, at the end of May, we had all of the results and asking organizations based on all of the priorities that you had and have, just reviewed all of those with you. What are the initiatives that you're focusing on? Do you have a planned initiative in any of these different areas? So when you look at this top 10 here, and there's more than top 10, these are the ones that are top 10, not the other ones 11 through 20 and 30, because there's a lot of other things that organizations are focusing on, but not many of them, not enough to make the top 10. So number one, data analytics and reporting. When we came into this year, and you can see it has not changed from the beginning of the year. Data analytics was the number one area of focus. The most number of organizations, so when you look at the entire population of organizations that participated in this study, the highest percentage of organizations say, yes, I have an initiative to improve our data analytics and reporting. That was the most number of organizations was in that particular area. Number two is generative AI. Now, what's interesting, I have two up arrows here. And what that means is that from the beginning of the year to now, this is elevated. Many more organizations have a generative AI or AI technology initiative planned in procurement supply management for 2025 than where we were earlier in the year. When we came into this year, this was number 8. So it was much further down. So a lot of organizations were exploring it, but they hadn't had planned initiatives. So this was by far the most significant change and an increase that we saw from the beginning of the year to where we are now in terms of initiatives that organizations have planned for 2025. What you also see is, contract management, category management. Category management in the little poll that we just did was number 1. Now, we didn't put all of these things on the poll as, because we have a limitation in terms of 5. But category management continues to be. Typically, it's down a little bit. It was number 3 coming into 2025. It reduced from 3 to 4 as we're sort of sitting here in the mid part of the year. But the other big change that we saw was talent. The last 2 years, coming into 2024 and coming into 2025, data was number 1, talent was number 2. And I would always mention this to organizations. I said, you know what? We fully understand. I would mention that to other people within our firm at Hackett and highlight. I said, this is very interesting to me because to make AI work, we have to focus on data. We also have to focus on our talent and the skills and how we're going to blend that environment together. How are we going to enhance our talent to engage successfully and effectively with an environment that may be more permeated with agents, etc., as we look forward. Skills, some of the roles that we have fundamentally change. And in some areas, it changes significantly. And so this is an area that we see. It's also interesting because I have organizations now talking about that they want to think about talent. If we're sitting here in 2030, what does the role of a category manager look like? What is the role, or I'd even go one step further. What's the day in the life of a category manager in 2030 in an environment that's much more embedded with agentic AI than where we are today? It changes. And so then the question is, what the skills of that category manager are necessary to participate successfully and effectively in that environment? As we look further, you see other areas, sourcing. All these areas were in the top 10 in terms of initiatives planned to improve within the organizations. If you go to the next slide, I want to give you a different view of all of these different initiatives. And what we did in this next slide is to look at it in two different dimensions. What you see here are all of these bubbles. These are all of the areas. Now, there's more on this than on the previous slide. It's not just the top 10, it's all of the areas that we asked organizations about. But what we did is we plotted this because we asked organizations about each of these initiatives as to how important are these initiatives to you? And secondly, how mature are you in these capabilities today? Now, the pink box in the lower right highlights areas that we call critical development. It's areas that organizations highlight as being very important to them, highlighting that these capabilities are very important to them, but they feel less confident about their maturity in these different areas. Now, if we went back 3 years ago, you would have saw many more, I'll say, capabilities in this pink box. Over the last several years, we've seen an increase in terms of capability proficiency across a number of different areas. Things like data analytics and reporting has elevated. It was in the pink box several years ago. Areas even like supplier relationship management has elevated to where you see today. So what you see in the pink box is a much smaller population of organizations and capabilities that they have in these different areas than what we saw several years ago. So we've made a lot of improvement in this area. Now, the other thing I'll highlight on this is that the size of the circles is really similar to what I just showed on the previous slide. The bigger the circle, the more organizations that highlighted that they have an initiative planned in 2025 to improve this particular capability in their organization. So I think what's important here is I always like to look at extremes. Look at where the circles are the biggest. This is where you find many organizations improving and focusing on improving these capabilities. But I think it's also important and insightful to look at where the circles are the smallest. And you can see some of those, and some of them are very small and hardly able to see them because they're so small. And this is where you have very few organizations have an initiative plan to improve this particular area in their organization in 2025. So let's look at how things have changed to where we are today in the middle of the year of 2025. So if we move to the next slide, one of the things that you'll see, is, and I'll just show on the bottom. If you recall in the previous slide, and generative AI was more to the middle. It was more to the middle, and what you're seeing here, it's moved significantly to the right. meaning that organizations has elevated this as an important capability to have in their organization. I think a lot of this was due to the fact that what we're seeing is a rapid acceleration in the awareness and the understanding of what AI, generative AI, agentic AI, all of the various versions that are out there, the impact and the ability to improve the productivity as well as other capabilities within our organizations has. We're better understanding those capabilities, and there's a number of us that are already deploying it within our environment. And so that has moved and in terms of importance. At the same time, it has moved up a little bit in terms of the maturity level, but not to the level. It's still what we would call very much in that critical development area. And so, most organizations say, hey, it's very important now to us because we have a much more understanding of what it is in our organization. And certainly there's a lot of pressure from the enterprise to figure out how we can use it to improve what we do in supply management. But at the same time, we don't feel as mature as we need to in this area. And so Circle has gotten much bigger as well. So a lot more organizations have initiatives planned in this particular area. The rest of it, you see, it's relatively similar. You see some changes in some of the different areas. Category management has come down a little bit. Maybe that's a reflection of understanding as we started to be focusing on the tariffs within our environment, understand how important. This may have helped us understand, well, maybe our category management skills and what we're doing isn't as mature as we thought it was, because we have to now build that into our strategies. We have to do the scenario modeling in terms of what are those impacts in a very volatile, changing environment, and do we have that ability to do that? You're even seeing solution providers out there coming out with tariff capabilities built into their category management products, something that has evolved and emerged over the last couple of, I would say the last couple of months. So let's go from here. And what I'd like to do is just give you a couple of perspectives in terms of just, where are we, and, just to summarize some of the findings that we've had across all of this. So if we can move to the next slide. Just some final thoughts. When I came into this, I mentioned that there's going to be several areas that I wanted to focus on. We took a study that was much more broad than what I just covered with you. But what we wanted to do is just to, because of the volatility in the current environment, we wanted to explore what has changed. And, one is to be able to share this with all of you, but at the same time, it does help to drive our research agenda as an organization. As you look at this, I mentioned from a savings standpoint, fundamental there, less optimism today than where we were at the beginning of the year when it comes to the delivery and the planned delivery of cost savings and cost avoidances to our organizations. That may even change further as we go, further in the year as, more and more trade deals are cemented and agreed to between the various countries around the world. From a priority standpoint, the critical, thing there is, to me, was the elevation of creating and understanding that a priority for us has to be to start looking at supply management and procurement, not just as a capability within the organization to deliver savings and assure supply, et cetera, but looking at it one step further. How can we use our capability to create a differentiation? How can we create an advantage for our enterprise and prove it that we're able to do that? That is very valuable. It's what's incented. It certainly becomes and positions us in a different situation than potentially we have been in many years. And I think that opportunity is really opening for us with some of the technologies that are available to us and the insights that we can glean from the supply markets through those technologies and the data that Barreau gathers has available to us. The last area is the initiative. Where are we investing? Remaining the same, data, certainly talent is still elevated. But the big change here was to focus on an initiative Many more organizations highlight the importance of developing capability and embedding generative AI and agentic AI within their environments. So there's just a few things I want to leave with you. And so if we go to the last slide, as you look at this, and this was actually some of the thoughts that we had, even coming into 2025. As you look at what you are going to do, I reviewed priorities, improvement initiatives that we see more broadly across, several different geographies in the market. But what we have to focus on is understand that digital is here. It really started back in 2017 and 2018. We started using the term digital transformation. And digital transformation was fundamentally, looking at transformation, but taking a technology or digital first approach to that. It was also an opportunity for us to put the customer, that stakeholder centric in the operating model that we were developing as organizations. And today, as we think about digital and we think about automation, more and more of that is going to be embedded with AI and generative AI, and whether that's through solution providers, things that you do yourself, through your own models, et cetera. We're going to see this proliferate in a much more accelerated way, especially due to the I'll say in some ways the ease of implementation of agents within our environments. But we have to be very purposeful in terms of that architecture. It's a very crowded environment today, lots of different solutions out there. And I know it can be very confusing for folks. It's confusing for us. Literally hundreds and hundreds of solution providers and different ways to approach. I think the thing is that doesn't change is having a vision and understanding what does the organization want from you and focusing on doing that in your environment and looking at technology through that lens. Don't look at these as toys. I've seen too many organizations look at technology as toys. They want to try this out and try that. You need to do that early, especially with generative AI, to get people comfortable with that. And I find that most organizations have done that. They've explored with Copilot and ChatGPT, et cetera. They're doing summarization of contracts, they're putting RFPs together, et cetera. But there is such a vast horizon out there of what more we can go do. I think we have to start to think about things in the future, but do it in a very purposeful kind of way. Orient your operating model. I mentioned that as something that was elevated, really looking at the operating model. Your operating models as organizations will fundamentally change significantly over the next 3 to 5 years. I think we have to start thinking about that today. I made the comment that, one of the organizations I'm working with, when they came to me and said, listen, Chris, I can think about the technology, I understand agents, et cetera, but what is the impact on our people? And this is a particular organization I'm going to be spending some time on, later in August, where we're going to sit down and start to envision what is the day in the life of a category manager in 2030? Can you describe? I wake up, I get my coffee, I turn on, I'm getting feeds from multiple agents into my supervisory agent. It's telling me this is what's happened overnight. These are the recommendations I give you. What do you want me to do and how do you want me to act? I mean, it's going to be a different environment. It's hard to look at that. But if that's the environment, what are the skills that we need to be successful in that environment? And that's what organizations are starting to sort of try to uncover. That's part of your operating model. The other thing is just investing, and again, that talent. As I mentioned, we have to upskill. We have to look at and critically look at. But to do that, whether it be the operating model or the talent, we have to have a vision. We have to have a perspective. One of the terms I'm using, lately has been fuzzy visioning. I would say that if we went back to 2012, many of us could go and vision. And I look at organizations, they put a vision together, they have the 3 year plan, they have it all organized by this is what we're going to do in human capital, this is what we're going to do in technology, this is what we're going to do in process. And it's sort of, this is year one, year two, year three. And there was a goal. I use the term fuzzy vision because I think it's very hard or more hard today to really describe exactly what it's going to look like because of the acceleration of the technology within the environment. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Val, and maybe there's some questions that folks have that as I've been going through and sharing some insights. Is there anything out there?
Yeah, yeah, quite a bit, Chris. I don't think we'll be able to do justice in the 4.5 minutes left, but I
Okay.
think let's pick a few from the couple of dozen which just came in the last couple of minutes.
Yeah.
A lot of them are focused on the Hackett study, so I'm going to defer those to you. So I think the first question which came in was, do you see any significant regional differences in the top 10 priorities and initiatives? I think the background over here is, do you see a Middle East flavor? Do you see a diversification flavor? Do you see any kind of geo-economic plating in the responses? Are they quite consistent?
Yeah. No, we do, and one of the things I didn't share is those regional differences. And typically, what we do is we'll look at North America, and that's going to be dominated by the U.S., and we'll look at Europe, and then we'll look at Asia Pacific. Some of the things that I'll describe to you, where we see some of those differences. Probably not surprising is that we see much more, prioritize things like sustainability in Europe than we do in say in North America and specifically the U.S. That has been something that we've seen over the really since 2021 when sustainability really elevated significantly as a priority in our organizations. We've seen a little bit of a degradation of that, and one of the things that you saw was that sustainability fell out of the top 10 from a priority standpoint in our quick pulse update that we did, halfway through the year that I shared with you. Now, part of that's going to be due to the fact that in the pulse update that we did, the demographics were more heavily weighted to North America than the study that we did in the beginning of the year. So that's one of the areas that we see. There are other areas. One of the things I mentioned, like around the competitive advantage, it was interesting to us that over the last several years we started seeing that percolate. A priority for supply management organizations to create a competitive advantage for their enterprise. But the only place that it was percolating into the top 10 was in North America. It was in the US. We did not see that in Europe or within Asia Pacific. And what we're now seeing is it's more broad across. We now have seen that in other regions as well. So to answer your question, there are, and again, I'm trying to highlight some of the bigger differences that we see, and over time, sometimes they blend together, but they start off as regional differences, like the competitive advantage.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think there was a specific focus on GCC, and hence the question. I think they were trying to understand whether government-led transformation agendas, localization mandates like your IKTVA and ICB, and heavy reliance on imports, procurement reforms, which are on EGP platforms. I think that was the intent of the question. Chris, moving on to the next question. I think somebody wants to understand what the industry cohort was. Do you have a rough sense? Pharmaceutical, manufacturing, FMCG, food and beverages. Would you be able to define those? I think that's one of the questions which have come in.
I don't have those percentages off the top of my head, but as you saw there, it was more, skewed to service-based organizations in the update that we did. So, more than 50% was there. Typically, when we do the studies, it's typically pretty balanced between manufacturing and service-based organizations. But in many ways, it emulates the demographics of the population. And when you look at some of the populations that we look at, service-based organizations have been growing in percentage, versus the manufacturing. So you're going to see that in the results. When you look at it in an industry standpoint, what I will say, and I don't have those percentages right here, but they are pretty reflective of what the general population is what we tend to find. It's not going to be exact, but if you looked at the general population, you looked at the percentages within that population of what exists, our study, mirrors that to some level. It's not exact, but it's close to the general demographics.
Super. Thanks, Chris. We actually at the end of the hour. Thank you very much for your time,
Mhm.
Chris, and thank you to all of the attendees and participants and for all the questions you've put in. For the ones which we were not able to answer, we're going to send it across as an email to you. So thanks again for this.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it. Happy savings.
All righty.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye.